everyone. Welcome to American University Korea event, The Future of Japan-South Korea Relations in a Changing Asia. My name is Jiyoung Lee. I am on the faculty of American University, holding the position as C.W. Lim and Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies. We're so fortunate to have Dr. Nishino Junya joining us from Japan and Dr. Son Yeol joining us from South Korea. Another panelist, Dr. Sheila Smith, is unfortunately feeling unwell this evening. We hope that she feels better soon. So a point of departure of this roundtable is really that South Korea-Japan relations remain at its lowest point since 1965 normalization of their diplomatic relations. Against the backdrop of South Korean court ruling on forced labor during Japan's occupation of the Korean Peninsula and Japan's export restriction on key materials used for South Korea's electronics industry. I'm so excited that we have this opportunity to learn from these two renowned experts and scholars with lots and lots of insights on the workings of this very important bilateral relationship. Before I go on and introduce our panelists, one housekeeping item. After our speakers will share their insights, there is an opportunity for Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, please use Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So let me briefly introduce our speakers. Dr. Nishino Junya is a professor in the Department of Political Science at Keio University in Tokyo, Japan. He also serves as director of the Center for Contemporary Korean Studies at Keio University. His research focuses on contemporary Korean politics, international relations in East Asia, and Japan-Korea relations. He was a Japan scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a visiting scholar at the Seeger Center for Asian Studies at George Washington University, and an exchange scholar at the Harvard Yenching Institute. Dr. Nishino received his BA and MA from Keio University and PhD in political science from Yonsei University in South Korea. Dr. Son Yeol is president of the East Asia Institute and professor at Yonsei University, Seoul, Korea. Before joining Yonsei, Dr. Son taught at Jungwon University and was a visiting scholar at the University of Tokyo, Waseda University, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of California, Berkeley. He has served on several government advisory committees, including the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, South Korean Ministry of Trade, the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, and Northeast Asian History Foundation and the Korea Foundation. His recent publications include Japan and Asia's Contested Order, published in 2018 with T.J. Pempo, and Understanding Public Diplomacy in East Asia, published in 2016 with Jan Mellison, both from Palgrave Macmillan, and South Korea under U.S.-China Rivalry, published in 2019 in a journal, The Pacific Review. He received his PhD in political science from the University of Chicago. So without further ado, I would actually like to ask our two panelists my first question. In this relationship, diplomatic disputes over history are not new. But what changed this time? How optimistic or pessimistic are you about the prospect of Seoul and Tokyo finding a way for a breakthrough in the current stalemate? In Japan, there was there is a new Japanese Prime Minister, Kishida, and also there was elections in on October 31st. Do you see a summit meeting taking place between Japanese and South Korean leader anytime soon? So could I ask Professors Son and Professors Nishino to speak about probably 5 to 7 minutes each? Maybe I could probably ask Professor Nishino to go first, and then the second question, Professor Son could go first.
Well, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for the inviting me to this very meaningful seminar. I'd like to extend my thanks to Professor Region and American University. So regarding the first question, frankly speaking, I'm not so optimistic about the near future Japan-South Korea relations. And I would say that it is not easy for both leaders, I mean the Prime Minister Kishida and President Moon, to meet anytime soon. I would like to point out 3 points. So number one, yes, Prime Minister Kishida won the lower house election last month and gained a stable policy foundation, the political foundation for his cabinet. But his policy priority is on the domestic agenda, the COVID-19 and the economic revitalization. And on the foreign and the security policy side, I think he will follow the policy line of his predecessors, Prime Minister Abe and former Prime Minister Suga. So this means that Prime Minister Kishida will retain in a way, tough stance towards South Korea. And number two, with the South Korean presidential election approaching next March, so under this condition, I think that the Prime Minister Kishida will not seek the immediate solution or agreement between Japan and South Korea regarding the court ruling issue and also the comfort women issue. So Kishida will prefer the management of Japan-South Korea relations and not attempt the immediate improvement of the bilateral ties for the time being. So because he had in a way bad memory regarding the comfort women agreement in 2015. So at that time, Kishida was a foreign minister, and he realized the so-called comfort women agreement with the Park Geun-hye administration. But after the impeachment of President Park, the new South Korean president, President Moon, in a way, he abolished the agreement. So this bad memory make Prime Minister Kishida reluctant to make new agreement. And number three, then Kishida will try to manage the situation. But the one important fact is that now we are facing the liquidation process of the seized asset of Japanese company in South Korea. So then whether this situation allow Prime Minister Kishida to use some time or not is not still uncertain. Then I also want to point out in a way some positive aspect. So number one, Prime Minister Kishida appointed the Hayashi Yoshimasa as a new foreign minister. So we many observers expect that the new foreign minister Hayashi will take some flexible stance towards South Korea, because he's a person who put emphasis on the relationship with South Korea. And the number two, so Biden administration's the policy toward East Asia, is in a way a driving force to mitigate conflict between Japan and South Korea. So this is still a positive aspect. And the number three, lastly, both citizens in Japan and South Korea really wants to see more active active and positive relationship between the two countries. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these great insights. Professor Son, please.
Thank you, Professor Chi-Young Lee, for inviting me to this great panel. I'm really honored, and I largely agree with Professor Nishino about the questions that you raised. I'd like to put this the current stalemate in a bit longer historical perspective. Longer means that 10 years perspective. The current clash, as you explained, was started by South Korean court ruling and Japanese government's export control, and that escalated the bilateral dispute. But remember that 2019 events were preceded by the comfort moment conflict between the two, and that all started in 2011 when back then Prime Minister Noda and President Lee Myung-bak met on the bilateral summit, and then they exchanged harsh words, almost a verbal fight over the comfort woman, and then we see all these things. So a series of history disputes ever since continued, and it's been a decade. So I used to call it a lost decade for both countries. In that sense, the problems lying between the two countries are structural in that we see a deep mistrust developed on the leadership level. As Professor Nishino just mentioned, that Mr. Abe and his successors versus Park and Moon, and we see that the popular view of the other country's leader, according to the public poll made by East Asia Institute and then Kenron NPO for the past 9 years actually. So the popular view of, let's say, Korean public's view of Mr. Abe and Japanese public's view of Mr. Moon Jae-in is very, very negative, actually extremely negative, that 2% of the each public likes the other country's leader. So the leadership level mistrust and confrontation expanded to the popular level, and then the leaderships kind of politically exploit the deteriorating popularity of the other country and the leaders. So we see kind of negative spiral between the two countries on both the leadership level, government level, and popular level. So the things are very much structural, developed over a decade, and so it's really difficult to find a real breakthrough at the moment. So in that sense, I agree with Nishino-san that things are not going to be improved anytime soon until maybe after a new Korean president is elected and the new government launches in May next year. That doesn't guarantee that we will find a breakthrough, but that gives you an opportunity. And also, I would like to point out that Prime Minister Kishida also should be politically fortified than the current situation. Then we see the Korean president under honeymoon, immediately after May, and Prime Minister Kishida, maybe the election win, another big election win, or sometime before then, we might see some opportunities for both countries to find an opportunity to make progress. I'd like to comment on a few things on the Korean side. I see two tasks lying for the next government, whoever will be the next president. One is to resolving as soon as possible the pending issues. Just Nishino-san mentioned the asset liquidation things, and particularly court ruling over the forced labor. The new government that will have to make a political decision anyway. So that is largely depends on the political will of the new Korean president at a time when he or she enjoys a honeymoon. I mean, I said that does not mean that history problem can be resolved. Maybe the longer perspective here again that I like to make 2 points. One is that now the victims, former comfort women, both, and forced laborers are passing away. As of now, comfort woman survivors are 13. At the time of 2015 comfort woman agreement, the number was 48. So in 5 years, we see a drop of 35. And next 5 years, few would survive, which means that so far we have seen a kind of a persuasive logic from both sides that let's do something compensate before it is too late for the survivors. Now it is too late. So the government, South Korean government, will need to shift at some point its attention currently focused on compensation, legal stuff, shift to more about the memory issues, how to commemorate the history. That's a thorny issue as well. But we haven't really get into this realm. It is not actually the realm for the government negotiation. It is for the scholars and scholars discussion within the country and also between the countries. So how the government move the focus, shift the focus from the current discussion to the next stage is, I think, for the next 5 years. It's going to be a big issue. And second, obviously, both governments, particularly, the new government in South Korea and Kishida cabinet will need to recuperate the cooperation on a range of issues, from security to economics, health to climate changes, etc. And it is truly unfortunate that a few days before there's a press conference and only American representative showed up to discuss. You have to talk about the security, interests, etc. So you really need to take a future-oriented ways to cooperate and foster an environment that makes it easier actually to come to terms with history in the long run. Let me stop here.
Thank you so very much. I see and really get a better picture of how this relationship, there's really a multiple layers at the public and public perception level. There's the civil society and the victims in South Korean society, and also the policymakers, their perceptions. And the second thing that I see emerging from this conversation is that provided that Prime Minister Kishida and his cabinet enhances its domestic standing, perhaps next year, early next year, immediately after the South Korean presidential election, that may be a window of opportunity to have some sort of fresh start for the two relationship to come to terms with the current difficult situation. Well, let me actually move to the second question, which is actually regarding the regional security situation surrounding the two countries. I would like to discuss, how South Korea and Japan typically, we look at them, both of them are democracies, they are allies of the United States. They have, they're located very close to one another, a lot of similarities. So the expectations are such that they should be able to work together to navigate, the many changes that are taking place in Asia right now. But when we look at their foreign policies, against the backdrop of rising tensions between Beijing and Washington and the United States policy change towards China, one really wonders whether, they are in fact looking at each other as a partner in navigating these, uncertainties. So, in other words, how do policymakers, and actually public, but policymakers really who are in charge of crafting, responses to these various challenges, arising from US-China competition, and also these, issues that are at the intersection of trade and security, many challenges are going on. I mean, do they see each other as a partner that can, that they should work together and to really create and prepare themselves for a better kind of future, because there are just so many changes that are taking place in Asia. So if I may ask Professor Son to go first this time, and then Professor Nishino, please.
Thank you for such an important question. I'm not sure that I can give you a satisfactory answer. Let me tell you kind of divergence between Japan and South Korea over the issue of so-called China challenge. Let me share. Wait a minute. I'll show you some graphs. This figure is a public poll analysis of the public polls made. I just introduced that a few minutes ago by the East Asia Institute and Kenron NPO. Nishino-san also involved in that project. And as you see here, there's a rising tide of China threat in South Korea, among the South Korean public. As you see here, the red line is China, and currently over 60% of South Koreans view China as a military threat. North Korea is 85% on the top, but China is really approaching to that level. As you see here, that it's been quite low until 2015, and imagine what happened. It's a thought, retaliation, and then public, perception of China dramatically aggravated ever since, and is now here. And Japan is has been used to be quite high, but coming down and down, and particularly past 1 year, it dropped from 44% to 38%. Not so much, but it shows a trend here. Next is the same, that the red part is Japanese public, and their Chinese perception as a military threat is about 70%, and Korea is 61%. So we see a convergence of the China threat between the two societies. Here, the image of China to South Korean public, it's increasingly bad for the past 3 years. So, the previous graph talks about, illustrates, threat perception. This is the overall image of China. And, in 2 years, it increased from 50% to 73%. And good impression is only 10%. So currently Japan's, South Korean image of Japan is slightly over 20%. So China is half of that. So there's a sort of, widespread, development in South Korea of the deteriorating image of China and threat perception. So I think that is reflected in this survey, that your view on the strengthening of trilateralism, trilateral security alliance. More specifically, it is not just security, but military security, 군지 안보, 군사 안보 alliance. And Koreans, it's increased from the previous year. As you see, A and B agree, and then it increased over 16%. So right now, 65% of South Koreans support trilateral security cooperation, including, Japan as partner. But in Japan, the number is slightly decreasing, and overall, it's less than 40%. So Japanese public is reluctant, largely reluctant, compared to South Korean government. So we see the comparable number of South Koreans and also the Japanese view that almost 40% sees that there's a need to contain Chinese rise when you comes to the trilateral security alliance. So the Koreans' number here is quite surprisingly high. Economically important countries, then you see the China, for South Korea, China is about 80%, but United States, even though US economy is in struggle, Chinese economy for the past year, they figured plus growth, but many think that United States is more important than China. for South Korea, and Japan is clearly US over China. So, and you see these trends. So my point here, also lastly, this is really interesting, that need for tough response on the suppression of human rights issues in China. And here, the 61% of South Korean public supported, much more than Japanese 35%. So my point here is that the China challenge is real today in Korean society, and the Korean public is moving into more cooperation with the United States and also with Japan. That doesn't mean that the Korean public turn more favorably toward Japan because they see some fundamental issues being improved, like history issues or better communication between the two, but simply because there's a demand for trilateral and demand for more cooperation with Japan together with the United States. So here, that's the point. But Japan, for Japan, China challenge has been dealt with the various policy responses, including the Quad and strengthening U.S.-Japan alliances, and FOIA is another one, and CPTPP is also another one. So Japan exercising multifaceted responses to Chinese challenge, but South Korea so far not really interested or willing to join Japan in those policy initiatives, but rather now you look more toward trilateralism and more closer cooperation with Japan plus the United States. So I see kind of slight divergence between Japan and Korea, although both goals or current security imperatives are really shared in the name of China challenge. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much for sharing this very valuable data. I haven't seen these before, and it actually provides a very keen insight, especially a possibility of converging threat perceptions amongst the South Korean and the Japanese, vis-a-vis China, may be a variable in the future when they think about coordinating their policies and whatnot. So thank you for sharing that. Professor Nishino, please.
Yes, I'm very glad to hear that now many South Korean is again becoming in a way supporter of trilateral cooperation among the US, South Korea, and Japan. And so you can find the detail of this, the opinion survey in the website of East Asia Institute, which the Professor Son is reading. So I want to say that so Japan and the Japanese policymaker, in a way, were a strong supporter of trilateral cooperation among the US, Japan, and South Korea. But in a way, still, it is true that still many Japanese policymakers need trilateralism among the three countries. But this is not for coping with China, but for North Korea. So now, frankly speaking, many Japanese readers and policy makers want more cooperation with Quad countries, or the United States, Australia, and India. And on the security side, especially regarding maritime security, now Japanese government is strengthening the cooperation with major EU countries, Britain, France, and German. And recently, so as you may know, the Japanese government conducted the joint military exercises these countries. So regarding the Prime Minister Kishida's foreign and economic policies, so as I mentioned, we can see the strong continuity between the Kishida and the predecessors. And but I want to point out these 3 points. The Kishida, Prime Minister Kishida and his cabinet put more emphasis on these 3 points. So number 1, diplomacy based on the democracy or value-oriented diplomacy will be promoted. So since the Abe cabinet, the Japanese government has been pursuing the free and open Indo-Pacific or HOIP strategy aimed at maintaining and developing the rule-based liberal international order in the region. The Prime Minister Kishida continued to push ahead with this HOIP and focus more on protecting universal values such as democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. So in this regard, Prime Minister Kishida recently appointed Mr. Gen Nakatani, the former defense minister, as Prime Minister's aide for human rights. So number 2, the Kishida's cabinet continued to strengthen the US-Japan alliance and enhance Japan's defense and deterrence capabilities to cope with the severe security environment in the region. So clearly, China's military expansion and assertive action around the Senkaku Island required a more build-up of Japan's maritime security capability. And also North Korea's growing military nuclear and missile threat press for the development of missile defense capability for Japan's security. So Prime Minister Kishida expressed that his cabinet revised national security strategy by the end of next year. So third, Prime Minister Kishida has made it clear that he places more importance on economic security. So Kishida pointed out the securing supply network of strategic materials, including the semiconductors, and preventing the outflow of advanced technologies are urgent priorities for Japan's national security. So Kishida created new ministerial posts for economic security in his cabinet. So I would say that it is clear that all these characteristics are consistent with the direction of the Biden administration's foreign and security policies in the Indo-Pacific region. So Biden values the solidarity among democracies to counter autocratic countries such as China and Russia, and emphasize the cooperation with the United States allies, not only in military, but also in economic security. So amid the US-China strategic competition, the Biden administration pursued to cooperate and share responsibilities more with its allies, Japan and South Korea, actually. So in other words, the current security environment in this region, in East Asia, and the US foreign and security policies so strongly demand the cooperation between Japan and South Korea. But again, the reality is that, as I mentioned, now the Japanese government put more emphasis on the cooperation with Quad and EU major countries. And I also want to point out that on the other hand, the South Korean government, Moon Jae-in government, wants to more cooperation with ASEAN countries and India in the framework of so-called New Southern Policy. So South Korean government, Moon Jae-in government, tried to mitigate confrontation between the United States and China by fostering in a way, the middle power cooperation among South Korea and ASEAN countries in this region. So, so then, as Professor Sonyeol mentioned, so in a way, clearly now we can see the in a way divergence between Japanese and South Korea's policy regarding the addressing the Indo-Pacific region. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for these great detailed discussions about where the two governments are. Thank you, thank you. Well, before I open the floor for Q&A, I wonder if I can just ask briefly, because some of the audiences who join today's discussion might be interested in say looking at this question from the United States policymakers' point of view. Is there anything or basically for the United States can do to help the two countries to have a breakthrough in their diplomatic relations? And we talked about the trilateral strategic partnership. So if you have any insights in terms of policy recommendation, yeah. Well, why don't I actually ask Professor so, no.
Okay, let me begin. For the U.S. government, I like to support so-called the two-track approach. Ideally, that one track, both countries, Japan and South Korea, discuss the thorny history issues, and another separate track discuss security, economic, non-traditional security issues, etc. That's difficult, making two track. But at the moment, it is almost impossible to resolve history issues altogether before moving on to other areas, security cooperation, economic cooperation, right? So it is difficult, but you should maintain that approach, and that's what Obama administration pushed it to both governments back in 2014, 15, and 16. That the approach came against the Park Geun-hye's so-called one-track approach that, unless Japan comes up with a reasonably good proposal with regard to comfort women, and that also meets the standard or eye level of the South Korean public, I will not meet, Japanese Prime Minister. So that's fundamentally one-track approach, and there's a danger, clearly drawing lessons from that period that that action actually aggravated popular emotion in both countries, because government the leadership made a tough, stance against the other party, and that kind of, aggravated the overall atmosphere, and that actually makes negotiation very difficult. And that's what happened. So even though you made, strenuous efforts to, reach to the conclusion agreement in December 2015, that was easily nullified by the public because anti-Japanese sentiments were so high. And Madame Park actually helped contributed to raising that level. So I see I suspect the similar development occurs in the Japanese society that Mr. Kishida following Mr. Abe's one-track approach. This is my interpretation. Nishino-san might have a different opinion over, the Japanese policy toward Korea as one-track approach. But currently, the Japanese government asks South Korean governments to come up with a reasonable proposal with regard to court ruling and etc. Unless they are not really, fundamentally reluctant to come to these all issues. So before aggravating the public opinion by taking one-track approach, both governments really have to come up with this two-track approach. And in that sense, America's job is to promote what you actually promoted in the previous government. That yes, United States, I think, should not render judgment on history issues. I think that's really difficult and impossible. Instead, make full efforts to, diffuse tensions and put, ask these two governments to, take a two-track approach, and then, facilitate cooperation on the cooperation issues.
Thank you so much. Professor Nishino, please.
Yes, thank you. I basically agree with Professor San's argument, but I would say that originally the Japanese government, former Abe cabinet, had taken so-called two-track approach. But after the Supreme Court ruling in 2018, so because this court ruling is really severe and important negative impact to the bilateral ties, then Japanese government tried to want South Korean government to tackle this ruling first. Then now the Japanese government is taking in a way the one-track approach, but at the same time, after the start of Biden administration, now the Japanese government and also South Korean government now try to restore or reactivate trilateralism among the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. So this is in a way positive sign, and I want the United States to try to activate this trilateral framework, especially under the Biden administrations. We often see the trilateral policymakers meeting, including the vice ministerial meeting. Yes, it was very unfortunate that we saw the cancellation of joint press conference this time, but still I think it's very important to try to reactivate this trilateral framework. The first three in dealing with North Korea, and then going forward to in dealing with the more broader issues in the Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see about 3 key takeaways. One is the significance of track 2 diplomacy. 2 is activating and paying greater attention to the trilateral format where Tokyo and Seoul and Washington can come together and have better communication and enhanced dialogue over issues that concern them. And 3, the importance of being mindful of the the policymakers' actions and their impact on public perceptions in both societies, especially because once the public perception really get aggravated, it's very difficult to turn things around, even when there is a political will at a later point at the government level. So we actually have only about 4 minutes. I apologize. It was such an enriched discussion, and I really, truly learned so much. Why don't I actually read out the 3 questions that we have in the chat box? We do have 4. When I read all 4 questions, there will be time to end. Why don't I, so let's see if I can actually summarize, and I'll just read all 4 of them. And then, if Professor Son and Nishino have any immediate reaction, please feel free, but I will have to apologize that we are going to end our session at 6:55 in 3 minutes because of the transition into the next event. So the first question is basically, South Korea and Japan have a lot of history going back many years, and there are many benefits that could come from better relationship. But what is it that's holding them back? That's first question. Second question is, how would RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, shape China, Japan, South Korea relations in the future under the competition of US and China in global order? And then the third question was Tokyo-Takeshima dispute, how they impact the bilateral relations. And then the last question is, South Korea perceives China as a threat, while Japan sees China as less of a threat. How does threat perception in respective context impact the future understanding and negotiations between these 2 countries? I see that some of these were already covered in the presentations, but at this point, if I may ask our panelists any final thoughts that may answer these questions. Why don't I actually invite Professor Nishino first and then Professor Son?
Yes, so thank you for many questions. So I want just mention one thing. So we now Japan and South Koreans are often looking at the very unfortunate history between the 2 countries. But I often say that we look more at the positive history, especially since the 1990s, this also DJ Obuchi Joint Declaration and so on. But so we often say that we need to go back to the 1998 Japan ROK Joint Declaration. But I think that 3 things became bigger. One is the rise of China's position in this region. And the number 2 is North Korea's military threat. And the number 3, the domestic audience between the 2 countries. So the joint declaration in 1998 is a very good reference point, but we needed to upgrade or go forward to address these 3 bigger things. This is my point in the current Japan and ROK relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Son, very briefly, because we have to leave.
Yes, I think the question number 2, it's about economic relationships. So I briefly touch upon that. RCEP is an important development, but at the same time, it is not really the high standard trade agreements. So there are a lot to be updated, and in that sense, another, I don't say rival, but parallel developments in CPTPP is also important. And if you look at the Korea-Japan tariff tariff agreement under the RCEP, it is low. The liberalization is about 84%, which is far lower. So the RCEP in nature, it is a medium level liberalization that needs to be upgraded. So that's a good starting point for 3 countries, Korea, Japan, China, plus other countries to work together toward integration. But at the same time, CPTPP is also very important, and how CPTPP is moving up with lots of applications from various countries. We'll see these 2 trade negotiations will increase the possibility of more open, liberal, and integrative economic architecture in the region. That eventually helps Korea, Japan to work together better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really sincerely thank our speakers, Professors Nishino and Son, and all of you who joined today, and my wonderful colleagues, Ms. Christiana Kessner and also Kate Arian. Thank you so very much for joining today, and I hope to see you at our next event. Thank you so much.